Welcome to We the People on WKMnews.com. We're the voice of liberty here in the Ohio River Valley. I'm Rick Roos.
I'm Josh Denny.
We'd like to shout out to our friend Doc in DuPont and so many others who served our country so valiantly. We are blessed to have Marty Wood, Indiana Coalition's Director for the Convention of the States Project. It's a project of Citizens for Self-Government. Welcome, Marty.
Thank you for being here.
Where are you from?
Fishers, Indiana.
That's just north of Indianapolis.
Yes.
Right.
So, just really quick too, how did you get started with this project?
Well, probably like many people who've raised a family and had kids and watched the kids grow up and not spent a lot of time involved in politics. As they've gotten older, moved away, I've started to pay attention more, had more time on my hands, and of course the events over the last several years have kind of shoved politics, right to the focal point for a lot of us. So I got very interested in how I can help out and support things. I started, going to a number of groups and was asked to join this project several months ago.
Gotcha. So, as we look at, whether it's recent events or the last 20 years, it doesn't seem to matter. Washington is broken. I think everyone, on our side definitely agrees with that. And so we're starting to look at and hear people talking about from a lot of different directions this Convention of the States. So that's what you're working on. Explain to folks who don't know, at a high level, what is that option and why would that be something we're interested in today?
Well, that's a good question. I actually was intrigued by this myself. I never remembered falling asleep in a government class, but frankly and honestly, I never heard of this process before. Yet it's clearly identified in Article 5 of the Constitution. And it's a brilliant process. It goes back to the way the founders intended for the states to retain their rights, the states to ultimately retain the bulk of the power. They were coming away from an oppressive government, and they didn't want to have an oppressive government take over down the road. So this process is part of Article 5 of the Constitution. It essentially does exactly the same thing as what most people are aware of as far as rules and regulations for amending the Constitution. But it puts the power in the states' hands, whereby 2/3 of the states can petition the government, Congress, for a convention of states. And upon 2/3 going after that petition, Congress must call a convention, and at that point, the states send delegates to the convention, just like the original 13 colonies did, and those delegates discuss and develop amendments to the Constitution. And it is that, I want to stress that, it's amendments to the Constitution. It's not a new Constitution, it's amendments to the Constitution. Article 5 addresses amendments to our Constitution. And at that point, once those amendments are voted on by the delegates, they're brought back to the states, and the rest of the process is the same. It takes 3/4 of the states to ratify each amendment that is proposed. And once ratified, they become amendments to the Constitution.
Now, just a little bit of a follow-up on that. So I've seen a lot of people concerned about, this runaway convention, et cetera, and I'm sure we'll get into that later. But as I see this being drawn up in states around the country, we're looking at there would be a one amendment, one issue. We're not opening this up for whatever any given state wants to bring in, correct? In other words, Indiana would have, their delegates would go in with understanding they would vote a certain way on an amendment, correct?
Well, let me clarify that a little bit. That's a good question. The focus of the Convention of States project is we have put forth a single focus for this petition. Okay, all states must send the same petition. If they don't, you can't get 2/3. They have to be the same petition. So the petition is to limit the power of the federal government. Okay. There's a few other things that it talks about, financial responsibility and other things. The petition itself is online, but it's a single focus petition. We're trying to get 2/3 of the states to sign and send in the exact same petition. Okay, that's critical. Once that occurs, the delegates that are sent by the states are going to be charged, and there's a parallel process going on that I'm sure we'll talk about a little bit later, that there's an assembly of state legislators that are working hard now to define the rules for this process, okay? But essentially the states will send their delegates, and the state legislatures, the general assemblies, will charge their delegates with the interests of the state, okay? But it has to meet the terms of the petition to limit the power of the federal government. So we can't come up with amendments that go to personal freedoms, Second Amendment, anything like that. It's got to limit the power of the federal government.
Well, why do we even need it? It's obvious to us that the Congress isn't, but shouldn't our government be following the Constitution, which was ratified back in 1789?
Well, I'll answer that this way. Yes, we need it, and yes, they should, and yes, they are. And I'll clarify that. Most people think that the Constitution, I can't tell you how many people I meet talking to different groups around the state who are just appalled by some of the things that are going on, and they go, how do they get by with this? This isn't constitutional. Well, again, is it constitutional? All right. The Congress feels that what they're doing is constitutional. Things are challenged. The Supreme Court addresses the challenges, and the Supreme Court rules. Or what's been happening more frequently is that things are not challenged. Executive orders of the president. Congress has, the authority to pass laws, not the president. Congress isn't challenging that. So regulations from the EPA and other regulatory bodies, all of this continues to build up because they're not being challenged. And so, yes, we do need it. We do need to challenge it. We are growing exponentially, and a good example is our debt. We passed 18 trillion mark a few weeks ago, and some interesting numbers. I heard a statement that the unfunded, the committed but unfunded, currently unfunded dollars and cents that are in various laws that have been passed total up to over $90 trillion. There's not enough money in the world to meet that obligation. So anybody talks about, are we out of control on growth? At least financially, absolutely we are.
So, and you talk about that budget, it seems to be, the focal point right now, if you were going to attach an issue to this movement, is a balanced budget amendment, correct?
Well, it is and it isn't. That's certainly at the forefront of everything that we hear on the news, everything that we're seeing, Obamacare legislation, things like that. But if you get back down to the core of this, okay, we send people to Washington to represent us, to represent we the people, but they tend to represent special interests and people that fund their campaigns and fund their reelection. So at the core of this seems, for me anyway, seems to be term limits. Term limits to limit their authority, limit the authority potentially of even the judiciary branch. We never put term limits on our federal judges, but it wasn't anticipated at that time. People just didn't live that long. They weren't in those positions that long. It was the nature of the job of politics that there weren't career politicians as many or as much then as there are now. And so we're constantly having these people in power to get reelected. They pass things to get reelected. They pass things to put themselves in history. And is that what we're really all about? So I think if you start with something core like term limits, you start to build on that right away toward limiting power and going right to the financial issues next.
So right. do you need a different convention for each of the issues, or you're basically going to have a laundry list of issues considered at a specific constitutional convention?
Well, again, no. The idea is that any of these amendments would be subject to what the delegates come up with at this convention, because any of these that would do that would achieve limiting the power of the federal government. Term limits would do states limits the power of the federal government. Tying a budget down limits the power of the federal government. So any of those amendments can be developed and defined by the delegates. It'll be completely up to them. And then again, ratification comes back by 3/4 of the states.
Now, you talked about term limits, and that brings me to a question that I shouldn't have to ask because it is a constitutional process. But if we go down that road where the states have placed this burden on Congress to call a convention, will they do it? Will they block it? I mean, you're talking about term limits. That's not going to be very popular. So,
no,
you know what I'm
exactly.
saying?
There's a gentleman by the name of George Mason who actually crafted this language in Article 5, okay? And as I learned about him and read more about how this process came about, I think he had what today is termed an aha moment. You know, he said, we're heading down this road, and, you know, we don't have any checks and balances for us to retain the power, to pull the power back to the states. And he came up with this language. And actually, it was the only language proposed during that convention of 1787 that went through unopposed and unargued by anybody. So everybody realized. Now, granted, it was a much smaller group than we have now, but I think common sense dictates that, you know, what's happening to us. We are a republic of 50 states, and yet we're constantly being mandated upon by our federal government.
So the Congress can't block it and they can't control it because it comes from the state legislatures.
It would be deemed unconstitutional. Nowhere in the Constitution does it give Congress that authority if the states petition. I have 2/3 of the states petition under Article 5.
And the states petitioned by way of the state legislatures.
That's correct.
So it wouldn't be just a mass.
Right.
Yeah, each state has to submit its petition. Each state will define how many delegates they send and what their delegates will work toward, but each state ultimately gets one vote. Just like when it comes back for ratification, each state gets one vote.
So you can have California would theoretically have, I think they've got 60 congressional districts. They could conceivably have 60 delegates, but they only have one vote.
Yeah, it'd be up to them. I think Senator Long in Indiana has crafted some language suggesting a delegate is chosen by both the House and the Senate of our legislature, and then an alternate is also selected. So in the event of an illness or somebody is not pursuing what they've sworn to and charged to do by the legislature, the direction they've been given, they can be recalled, and that alternate would take its place. It'll be up to each state to determine that process and to send their delegates. But ultimately, those delegates caucus, they determine among themselves and with the overall group what amendments they're going to support. And ultimately, when it comes to a vote on the amendments proposed by the delegation at the convention, each state would be allowed, there'd be a spokesperson, and each state would have one vote.
So as long as the Constitution has been the law of the land, how many times has this been used?
This is it's never been done at a full scale like this. This would be precedent setting in that regard. But conventions of states have occurred several times. They've been mostly on regional and local issues. States arguing. Most recent one was over water supply, Colorado River, and all the states that get water out of that. States met and had a convention and ultimately crafted that language. Things have moved forward from a regional level in the past through normal congressional process. But Congress has gotten to a point right now that it's just not working.
Right.
It doesn't appear that that's going to happen.
And you talk about that being precedent setting. But as I see it, we've got I don't think any one amendment, it's not going to be a one shot and done kind of deal. So in other words, we set that precedent. I have a feeling that it could be something more common in the decades to come for my kids, grandkids to continue this process of fighting this back. Is that how you see this, or are you think it's going to be more a faster track than that?
Well, I guess I see it the way I interpret the founding fathers saw it. It's a set of checks and balances. I think, in essence, they thought that by setting up Congress at large, Congress and the Senate, that body would effectively represent the people and would adhere to the Constitution.
Right.
All right. That body is not working. So this process is to pull it back and make it work on behalf of the states. Give the states the power. Now, once the states get back the power, if this works like everybody hopes, then will it be necessary to continue this? I don't know. But it's certainly in the Constitution. It certainly can and should continue if there's any doubt that Washington and Congress is out of control, because that's what it's there for.
Right.
This is We the People on WKMnews.com. We're the voice of liberty here in the Ohio River Valley. We're talking to Marty Wood, who's Coalition's Director for the Convention of the States here in the state of Indiana. It's called A Project of Citizens for Self-Government. Marty, as far as how are within the Convention of the States, how are the amendments ratified? I know they go back to the states, but is it a majority? Is it 2/3? Or are they still formulating that?
Well, one of the things that will happen when the first 2/3 again has to send the petition to Congress to call the convention. Mm-hmm. Then once the states send their delegates to the convention, that with the rules that are being identified right now through this assembly of state legislators, they will put that together and they will start to define the process of how they're going to function, what their structure is going to be. Mm-hmm. But it'll be left up to the delegates. So the delegates will determine, how things get put forward, how the vote occurs. But again, every state would have one vote. Generally, it's been a simple majority vote by the delegates to place an amendment on the list. And again, you prevent any kind of a runaway situation because, you've got 3/4 of the states have to ratify each and every amendment that is proposed in order for it to become an amendment to the Constitution.
Let's talk about that. I get excited when I hear this. I think most people who are out there saying something needs to change and they hear this option maybe for the first time, it sounds good. But there are a lot of friends out there, and I'm going to call them friends, who are dead set against this. You mentioned the runaway convention. There seems to be a lot of layers of safeguards against that, but I don't see that. I see a lot of, I'm going to, once again, to my friends, call that paranoia based on the safeguards that are there. What do you have to say to those folks who are just very concerned about this process?
Well, first of all, they are our friends. Anybody concerned about the Constitution is a friend.
Absolutely.
And I think that's important to remember. Different groups have a different focus, but when it comes down to it, the common denominator is that our freedoms are being, trampled upon by a dysfunctional Congress, and the Constitution is being manipulated. People say, don't mess with the Constitution. Well, we've been messing with the Constitution, and the Constitution, in a sense, is a mess as a result of how we've messed with it. They say, let's just reelect, each election, let's elect new conservatives. Well, to some extent, we've seen that that's starting to happen, but how long will that take? And how much further will we dig ourselves a hole relative to the budget and to, the transference of power that we all are, trying to retain? They talk about, states can nullify. Okay, the states can nullify, but look at the nullification process. If that has been working, or if that worked, why would we be looking at anything else? Okay, nothing is working. And I see nullification, too, is it's subject to the same intervention by lobbyists and special interest groups and corporate folks as anything else that's passing through, and influencing Congress right now. So, this is to get the state, get each state to act on its own. Where we, the people, have the most influence is with our state and local government. These are our friends, our neighbors. Our elected officials may live right down the street from us or in our neighborhoods. You can call them to the town meeting. These are the people that we can influence. When those representatives at the state level go to Washington, when our senators are in Washington, you can't even get an appointment with them. You can't talk to them. You talk to aides, and sometimes you're never heard. So, and again, they're there because they're being influenced in many ways beyond what most people can do. So it's all about getting the power back to the state and having that influence with your local and state officials.
What, getting back to the, as far as not messing around with the Constitution, now I know Mark Levin wrote the Freedom Amendments book, and I think they're very good and cogent amendments that could be considered the Constitution. What other, briefly, what other objections if people had, and then can you explain what nullification actually is?
Well, nullification is a process by which the states can basically determine that they're not going to adhere to guidelines that have been put on them by the federal government. They can nullify laws. Arizona, look at what's happened in Arizona, with respect to stopping and looking for IDs for people, okay? The government has always had some caveat whereby they're tying funding, they're tying, something that touches some other special interest group of some way to these elected officials to where, it makes it very difficult for them to do that. And so, again, if nullification worked, if states aggressively would nullify laws that were imposing sanctions or things on them that they didn't agree with, why wouldn't we be doing this already?
Richard Murdoch brought up a point that the last time that the nullification was enacted was the Civil War, and that didn't work out so well.
No.
Who has endorsed this project, Marty?
Well, several national figures are coming on board. Bobby Jindal has been one of the more recent ones. Colonel Allen West, Mike Huckabee, Glenn Beck, Senator Tom Coburn, a number of figures nationally. Rush Limbaugh talks about this every so often on his talk show. But the important thing is it's nice to get those endorsements. A lot of people, feel that those national spokespersons, really are something to trust. But I encourage everybody, educate yourself. I did. I think it's more important. There's this website, the Convention of States website, Mark Levin's book on Liberty Amendments, one of the more foremost people, and somebody I've gotten a lot out of his writings and his website is Rob Nadelson. Gentleman is absolutely an expert on the Constitution and specifically on this amendment. The Assembly State Legislator site is out there. There's a lot of good information, and frankly, if you educate yourself and you understand this process and you get behind it, you're going to support it the most. People who don't, who listen to other people, aren't going to dig in and be the strong grassroots that we need. So I encourage everybody really to educate yourself. There's a lot of good information out there.
What websites specifically? Convention of the States?
Conventionofstates.com. Convention of States is all one word. And then do a search. If you do a search for Rob Nadelson, Nadelson, you'll see just a ton of things come up right away on him. He's an expert on the Constitution and specifically on this article. Of course, Mark, you mentioned Mark Levin's book. It's an excellent read. The Assembly of State Legislatures. Google that, and you will get to what's been going on. They started last year. This is the effort that Senator Long in Indiana has been a part of. It started last year in Mount Vernon. They met over the summer here in Indianapolis. They just got done meeting last week, and there's actually a good read to a favorite kind of financial paper of mine is the Investors Business Daily. And last week they covered some of the concepts that the state legislatures were discussing, as well as this Convention of States project, and that there's a growing momentum out there. We have 3 states have sent their petition to Congress already: Florida, Georgia, and Alaska. And we now have it on either the House or the Senate floor in New Jersey, New Hampshire, Virginia, South Carolina, and with the commanding lead that the Republicans have taken over in Congress and Senate with this last election. We have, I believe it's 31 states are controlled by their general assemblies are controlled by the Republicans. 8 states are split, and I think it's 11 states, if that's the right math, that are controlled by the Democrats. And this isn't a Republican or Democrat issue, really. This is a state rights issue, and freedoms for us, we the people. It's up to us to take this back.
Now, on that, do all states have to participate in the convention of the states?
No, I don't believe all states have to participate, but obviously 2/3 do to get the convention called. Mm-hmm. And I think what would happen is that if 2/3 send the petition in and the convention is called, why would anybody stand on the sidelines? They're going to want to participate. They're not going to want to, not send delegates to a convention.
Right, exactly.
What's the status in Indiana? I know the General Assembly is going to meet after the first of the year. What's the process as far as the application within the state of Indiana? I know that Senator Long, they basically have a process by which they can select a delegate. But what is the process that needs to happen in the state of Indiana right now?
Well, first, the General Assembly has to agree and sign the petition, okay? And we do not have, as of the other day, we have a legislative liaison that's working with the legislators, and we do not have a sponsor in Indiana yet to address it to the Assembly, to either house. This will not. From our knowledge, this will not pass through as a bill. It'll be introduced for an up or down vote in both houses, and then go to the Assembly, and the state would then sign the petition if it's passed, and it would go to Washington. And so we're trying to get that introduced and sponsored by somebody to get that process moving right now. But our goal is to have the 34 plus states that we need in 2015.
How can people help?
Well, people can help in a couple of ways. First, again, like I said, educate yourself and really get behind this, because those that do are going to be the freedom fighters that we need to get the grassroots going and to build this coalition. Secondly, if you get online to the conventionofstates.com website and you agree and you sign the petition, you can sign the petition online. The petition is automatically sent to your local legislators, stating that you are supporting the Convention of States project. We are also asking groups, Tea Party groups, Constitution groups, anybody that's out there that gets behind this and their group, discuss it as a group, talk about it. And if your group can endorse us, there's a spot on the website for the group to endorse the Convention of States too. And I ask when I do my presentations around the state, I'm asking groups to invite their legislators. A lot of the legislators are not completely aware of this and how it works. They're asking several of the same questions that we're discussing here. And I think it's great to have your legislator there with your group so that this can all be discussed and your legislator can go away saying, that they've got backing or they don't have backing. We're not trying to impose this on anybody. We're all free people, and we'd like to. It makes a lot of sense to me. I'm 150% behind this from what I've learned, and I see a lot of other people as they dig into it more. It really knocks down the barriers.
How can I know you're giving this discussion around the state? How can people contact you, Marty?
You can get to me through the Convention of States. I'm at coalitions.in for the convention, and feel free to just call me. My number is 317-670-9256.
We'll put this on the broadcast as well. Marty, I'd like to thank you very much for your time. And,
absolutely.
And we'd like to have you back on as far as updates, as far as where we are in the process.
I'd be happy to do that.
So,
all right.
Closing thoughts?
No, just we really appreciate your work. I think a lot of people don't realize that you're just somebody out there that dug into this and decided to get behind it. We need more people doing that. So just really appreciate your work.
Thank you.
Well, God bless you, Marty, and God bless our audience and our country.